Move your filthy cows, you disgusting redneck trash. Cynthia Halloway screamed this as her white BMW X5 barreled toward my pregnant heifers. She laid on the horn, a shrill city sound that had no business echoing across my pasture. The cattle, normally as placid as a summer pond, startled and scattered, their heavy bodies moving with a panicky, clumsy speed that always made my heart jump into my throat. She thought because she drove a German SUV and ran the new HOA next door, she owned my land. She was about to learn that in Texas the deed is king, and a piece of paper signed in 1947 by my great-grandfather held more power than her entire world of leased luxury and leveraged debt. I spent $52,000 on concrete just to watch her life fall apart. And honestly, it was worth every single penny. My family's place, the Riverside Ranch, isn't some gentleman farmer's weekend hobby. It's 50 acres of prime Texas blackland prairie, bought and paid for with the sweat and savings of 4 generations of McCoys. My great-granddaddy, Jubal McCoy, cleared this land with a mule and a prayer. He built the original homestead, the bones of which still form the core of the house my wife Sarah and I live in today. We raise prize-winning Angus cattle, the kind of breeding stock that commands 5 figures at auction. It's a hard life, ruled by the sun and the seasons, not a 9-to-5 clock. There's a quiet dignity to it, a rhythm that gets in your blood. You learn to read the sky, the mood of the herd, the feel of the soil under your boots. It's a peace that money can't buy, and as I was learning, one that some people would do anything to disrupt. The trouble started, as it often does with a sign, a big gaudy one planted right next to my property line. Sterling Meadows. Luxury living with an authentic ranch vista. Below that, in smaller letters, Phase 1 now selling. For a year, I'd listened to the whine of saws and the rumble of earth movers as they scraped the neighboring 100-acre plot clean. They tore down the old oak motte that had stood for a century, leveled the rolling hills, and laid down a grid of asphalt streets with names like Pristine View Lane and Meadowlands Drive. It was a damn shame, but it was their land to ruin. My property line was marked by an old but sturdy 4-strand barbed wire fence and a gravel road, my gravel road, that ran a half-mile from the county blacktop straight to my barn and house. It was the only way in or out of the Riverside Ranch, and the deed and survey maps at the county courthouse confirmed it was mine, lock, stock, and barrel. The first time I met her, Cynthia Halloway, she was standing at my fence line, talking on her phone, one hand on her hip, pointy heels sinking into the soft dirt. She was dressed in a white pantsuit that probably cost more than my best bull. When she saw me approach on my ATV, she ended her call and pasted on a smile that didn't reach her cold, calculating eyes. "You must be the neighbor," she chirped, her voice as sharp as broken glass. "I'm Cynthia Halloway, the developer and lead agent for Sterling Meadows. We are just so thrilled to be here." I tipped my hat. "Beau McCoy, my family's owned this place a while." "Oh, how quaint," she said, the word dripping with condescension. "Listen, I just wanted to introduce myself and let you know how much our buyers are loving the, vibe." She gestured vaguely at my grazing herd. "It's so authentic. And that access road of yours is going to be a huge time saver for our residents heading into town, a real selling point." My spine stiffened. Fine. I stopped the ATV and killed the engine, the sudden silence making the buzz of the cicadas seem louder. "Ma'am," I said, keeping my voice even and low, "that's not an access road. That's my private driveway. It's on my property." Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "Well, yes, technically. But it's been used as a cut-through for ages, hasn't it? It's practically a community easement at this point. Our survey team mentioned it." I shook my head slowly. "No, ma'am, it has not. The only people who use this road are me, my wife, the feed delivery truck, and the vet. It's never been open to the public. There is no easement." I knew for a fact her survey team hadn't said squat because I'd talked to them. A couple of good old boys who respected a property line and had confirmed my boundaries to the inch. Cynthia let out a little tittering laugh. Oh, you old school ranchers. Always so territorial. Bless your heart. We'll work it out. I'm sure we can come to a very synergistic arrangement. She used corporate buzzwords like they were punctuation. Before I could respond, her phone rang again. She turned her back to me, already deep in a conversation about closing costs and upgrade packages, and I was dismissed. I started the ATV and drove off, a knot of unease tightening in my gut. This wasn't going to be simple. The very next day, the speeding started. A parade of SUVs, mostly Lexus and Mercedes models, all with temporary realtor signs in the windows, started using my road as their personal drag strip. They'd fly down the gravel lane, kicking up a plume of dust that settled on my pastures and coated the leaves of the old pecan trees. The speed limit was, and had always been, an unwritten but respected 10 miles per hour. These folks were doing 40, 50, easy. At the head of the parade, always, was Cynthia's white BMW X5. My first move was a simple one. I went to the hardware store and bought 2 professionally made metal signs. One at the entrance read, "Private property, no trespassing. This is not an entrance to Sterling Meadows." The other, 50 yards past it, read, 10 miles per hour. "Caution, livestock. We are not responsible for damage to your vehicle." I sank the posts in concrete 3 feet deep. They looked official and immovable. They lasted about a week. The signs were ignored completely. The speeding continued unabated. I was out mending a fence near the road when Cynthia's BMW came roaring past. I stepped out and flagged her down, my face set. She rolled to a stop, window gliding down with a soft hum. She didn't even have the decency to take off her oversized sunglasses. "Problem?" she asked, her tone bored. "Ma'am, I put those signs up for a reason," I said, pointing back toward the 10 miles per hour sign. "My cattle cross this road to get to the back pasture. You're going to kill one of them or yourselves driving like that." She sighed, a dramatic put-upon sound. "Look, Bo, my clients are very important people. Their time is valuable. We're just trying to get from point A to point B. It's a straight road. I'm sure your cows can manage to look both ways." She gave me another one of those empty smiles. "We're all going to be neighbors. Let's try to be neighborly, shall we?" She rolled up the window before I could get another word in and sped off, leaving me choking on her dust and exhaust fumes. That was it for polite warnings. The next Saturday, I spent the morning installing a new gate at the entrance to my road, right off the county blacktop. It was a heavy-duty, 16-foot tube steel gate. I sank the post deep and chained it shut with a thick, case-hardened security chain and a padlock that cost me $60. It felt good, final. I stood back and admired my handiwork. A clear, unambiguous statement. This far and no further. The piece lasted less than 24 hours. Sunday morning, I drove down to check on it. The chain was lying in the gravel, cut clean through with a pair of bolt cutters. The gate was wide open, swinging in the breeze. Fury, cold and sharp, went through me. This wasn't just entitlement anymore. This was criminal destruction of property. I went back to the barn, got an even heavier logging chain, the kind you use to pull stumps, and a bigger, nastier-looking padlock. I wrapped the chain around the gate and post so many times it looked like a metal python. While I was doing that, I had an idea. I went back to the house and dug out the trail cams I used to track deer patterns. I found a good spot in the thick branches of an old live oak that overlooked the gate, high enough that you'd never spot it unless you knew where to look. I mounted it, checked the angle, and set it to record video on motion. Let's see her argue with a time-stamped recording. 2 days later, the logging chain was cut. I checked the trail cam footage. There she was, clear as day. 7:15 a.m. The white BMW pulls up. Cynthia gets out, dressed for a boardroom meeting, holding a massive pair of bolt cutters that looked comical in her manicured hands. She struggled with the thick chain for a good 5 minutes, grunting and straining, before it finally snapped. She tossed the cutters in her back seat, swung the gate open, and drove through as if she'd just performed a public service. I saved the video file and labeled it trespass _ and _ destruction _ 01. It would soon have a lot of company. This became our ridiculous little war. I'd buy a new lock, a new chain. She'd cut it. I'd record it. I started putting up a second camera from another angle. I had videos of her. I had videos of her junior realtors doing it. They were arrogant, brazen. They'd wave at the camera sometimes. They thought it was a game. They thought I was just some dumb hick they could roll over. They didn't understand that for me, this wasn't about a shortcut. It was about my home, my livelihood, my family's legacy. And when you threaten that, a man like me stops playing games. I was documenting every cut lock, every trespass, every vehicle that sped past. I had a file on my computer that was growing by the day, a meticulous record of her escalating criminal behavior. I didn't know yet what I was going to do with it, but I knew it was going to be the ammunition I needed when the time was right. The politeness was gone from my heart, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. She had started a war, and I was damn well going to finish it. The turning point, the moment this Cold War went hot, came on a Tuesday in late May. The air was thick and heavy, promising a thunderstorm later in the day. I was moving a small herd of 5 heifers from the front pasture to the birthing pens near the barn. These weren't just any cows. These were my prize girls, all of them confirmed pregnant with calves from a champion bull I'd paid a small fortune for. Each one of them represented a potential $15,000 asset, not to mention the future of my breeding line. One in particular, a gentle heifer I called Daisy, was my favorite. She'd follow me around like a big, dumb dog and was just a few weeks from her due date. Moving pregnant cattle is a slow, delicate business. You don't rush them. You don't stress them. You walk slow, you talk low, and you let them take their sweet time. We were halfway across my private gravel road, a slow-moving river of black hide and swaying bellies when I heard it, the high-pitched whine of an engine being pushed too hard. I turned and saw the white BMW X5 cresting the small rise, not slowing down, not even a little. I started waving my arms, shouting, "Whoa, slow down, cattle crossing." But Cynthia Halloway didn't slow down. If anything, she sped up, and then she laid on the horn. The blast was obscene, a violent shriek that shattered the rural quiet. For a placid herbivore, a sudden, loud noise like that is the sound of a predator. It's a trigger for pure, blind panic. The herd exploded. 4 of them bolted for the far side of the road, but Daisy, my sweet, gentle Daisy, got turned around in the confusion. She spun, eyes wide with terror, and ran blindly back the way she'd come, straight into the 4-strand barbed wire fence she'd been peacefully grazing behind minutes earlier. The sound was sickening, a tangle of metal and flesh, a panicked bellow of pain that ripped right through me. The BMW screeched to a halt just feet from where I stood, frozen in horror. Cynthia rolled down her window, her face a mask of annoyance. "For God's sake, can't you control your animals? You're blocking the road." I didn't even look at her. All I could see was my heifer, tangled and bleeding, her heavy pregnant body sagging against the wire. I vaulted the fence and ran to her, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Easy, girl, easy," I murmured, trying to keep the rage and fear out of my voice. The barbs had dug deep into her flank and legs. Blood was welling up, dark and thick against her black coat. She was trembling, her breath coming in ragged, panicked gasps. Cynthia honked her horn again. "Hello? I have a showing in 10 minutes. Something inside me snapped. I slowly turned my head and looked at her. I didn't shout. I didn't curse. I let all the cold fury I felt settle into my eyes. I spoke in a voice that was quiet, flat, and more dangerous than any yell. "Get off my land." She was taken aback for a second, the sheer force of my anger finally penetrating her bubble of self-importance. "Well, I'm not telling you again," I said, my voice dropping even lower. "You drive 1 more inch on this road and I will personally drag you out of that car. Turn it around. Now." For the first time, I saw a flicker of actual fear in her eyes. She saw I wasn't bluffing. Muttering something about a lawsuit, she put the car in reverse and executed a clumsy 3-point turn, spraying gravel as she sped away. I didn't watch her go. I was already back with Daisy, trying to figure out how to get her untangled without causing more damage. It took me and my wife, Sarah, who'd come running from the house when she heard the commotion, the better part of an hour with wire cutters and a first aid kit. We finally got her free and limping back toward the barn, but the damage was done. The stress and the injury were too much for her. That night, she went into a traumatic premature labor. The calf, a little bull I'd already had high hopes for, was stillborn. Daisy survived, but the vet said her injuries were severe. She'd likely never carry another calf to term. Just like that, a $15,000 asset, a future champion, was gone, and a gentle creature was scarred for life, all because a woman in a hurry couldn't be bothered to slow down. That was the end of Beau McCoy, the polite neighbor. That night, as I buried the small, lifeless body of the calf my great-grandfather had cleared, I made a promise. This was no longer about a road. This was about justice. Cynthia Halloway had trespassed. She had destroyed my property. She had endangered my livelihood. And she had caused the death of an innocent animal. She had mistaken my patience for weakness. She was about to find out how wrong she was. The war was on, and I was done fighting with chains and padlocks. It was time to bring out the heavy artillery. Just 2 days later, as if on cue, a beige sedan I didn't recognize rolled up to my now permanently locked gate. A man in a cheap suit got out, squinted at the house, and taped a thick envelope to the gatepost. A process server. I waited until he was gone before I walked down to retrieve it. Inside was a summons. Cynthia Halloway, on behalf of her Sterling Meadows HOA, was suing me. The charges were ludicrous: willful obstruction of a public right-of-way, intentional interference with commerce, and damages to the reputation and financial viability of the Sterling Meadows development. She was seeking an immediate injunction to have my gate removed and was suing me for $250,000. I stood there in the middle of my own driveway, holding a piece of paper that accused me of blocking a road that didn't belong to her, and I started to laugh. It was a cold, humorless sound. The sheer, unmitigated gall of it was almost impressive. She injures my livestock, causes thousands of dollars in damages, and then sues me. This was her strategy: bully, lie, and litigate. Drown the simple rancher in legal fees until he gives up. It was a classic corporate tactic. But I wasn't some poor tenant farmer she could evict. My land was paid for. My roots went deep. And I had a fury burning in me that was hotter than a branding iron. Instead of calling a lawyer first, I drove into town the next morning. Not to the fancy law offices downtown, but to the county courthouse. It's a sleepy old building. Smells of dusty paper and floor wax. I knew the county clerk, a woman named Gloria, who had been there for 40 years and knew where every document in the county was buried. I told her the story. She listened patiently, nodding, her glasses perched on the end of her nose. "Halloway," she said, tapping a pen on her desk. "She's been in here a lot. Filing plats, permits, pushy. Thinks she owns the place." She stood up. "Let's go to the vault, Beau. Let's pull the old maps." For the next 2 days, Gloria and I were buried in the county records archive. We unrolled brittle, yellowed survey maps from the 1940s and 50s. We went through the original deed transfer when my great-grandfather bought the property in 1947. We traced every property line, every easement, every right-of-way filed in this part of the county for the last 80 years. And we found exactly what I knew we would. Nothing. There was no easement. There had never been an easement. The road was described in meticulous, ironclad legal language in the original deed as the private drive and sole ingress/egress for the McCoy parcel. Its dimensions and location clearly marked as being entirely within the borders of my property. It was as private as my own living room. The lawsuit was a complete and utter fiction, a house of cards built on a foundation of lies. I had Gloria make certified copies of everything: the deed, the original survey, the plat maps. I now had a stack of legal documents that could shred her lawsuit to pieces. The real bombshell, however, came from a much more informal source: Eddie the mailman. Eddie had been delivering mail on this route since I was a kid. He was a lanky, quiet man who saw everything and said little. He'd stop at my mailbox every day around 11 a.m., and we'd chat for a minute about the weather or the price of hay. A few days after my trip to the courthouse, he lingered a little longer. He handed me my mail, then leaned conspiratorially out the window of his little white truck. "Bo," he said, his voice low, "you need to be careful with that Holloway woman." "I'm learning that, Eddie," I replied. He glanced around, even though we were the only two people for a quarter mile. "It's not just the road," he whispered. "I deliver the mail to her sales office over at the new development. I see the stuff they're handing out to potential buyers." He reached into the passenger seat and pulled out a slick, glossy brochure. The cover showed a smiling, generic family having a picnic with my ranch in the background, photoshopped to look even more idyllic. The headline read, "Sterling Meadows, where luxury meets legacy." He flipped it open to an inside page. There was a map of the development, and there, clearly marked, was my road, labeled Ranchview Express Lane. The text beneath it was damning. "Enjoy exclusive private access to County Road 20 via the scenic Ranchview Express Lane, a unique amenity for Sterling Meadows residents that cuts 10 minutes off your drive to the city. Experience the charm of a real working ranch right at your doorstep." I stared at the brochure, my blood running cold. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a misunderstanding. This was calculated, deliberate fraud. She wasn't just trespassing. She was selling my property as an amenity. She was signing sales contracts with people based on a promise she had no legal right to make. That's when I knew I had her. The lawsuit was a bluff, a smokescreen to try and force me to give her what she'd already sold. "Eddie," I said, my voice tight, "can I keep this?" "I got a whole box of them in the back," he said with a grim smile. "She's in deep, Bo. I hear things. Divorced a rich fella in Dallas. Got taken to the cleaners. This development, she's leveraged up to her eyeballs. If these first phase houses don't sell and sell fast, she's going to go under. She's desperate." That was the final piece of the puzzle. Desperation. It explained the recklessness, the criminality, the sheer audacity of it all. She had bet her entire financial future on my gravel road, and she was willing to do anything to win that bet. I thanked Eddie, took the brochure, and went back to the house. The lawsuit, the cut locks, the injured heifer, and now this provable, contractual fraud. The picture was complete. The harassment escalated. As if sensing she was losing control, Cynthia went on the offensive. First came the official-looking trucks. An inspector from the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality showed up, responding to an anonymous complaint about illegal dumping of toxic agricultural waste and uncontained manure runoff polluting the groundwater. I spent a whole afternoon walking him around my property. I showed him my manure composting system, which exceeded all state guidelines. I showed him my rotational grazing plan that prevents soil erosion. He tested the water from the creek at the edge of my property. He was a professional, and it took him about 5 minutes to realize the complaint was bogus. He apologized for wasting my time and left, muttering about people using his agency to settle grudges. A week later, it was the county health department. Another anonymous tip, this time about unsanitary conditions and diseased livestock, posing a public health risk. A very serious-looking woman in a polo shirt spent 3 hours inspecting my barn, my feed storage, and my herd. She checked my vet records, which were immaculate. My cattle are my business. They get better health care than most people. Again, she found nothing. "Your operation is a model of cleanliness, Mr. McCoy," she said, clearly annoyed. "I'm sorry you had to deal with this." Then came the sheriff's deputies. At least 3 times they were dispatched to my ranch for a livestock at large call, with the caller claiming my cows were out on the county road. Each time they'd arrived to find my entire herd safely contained behind my fences. The deputies, who were local boys I'd known for years, were getting tired of it. "She's crying wolf one too many times, Bo," one of them, Deputy Miller, told me. "We're documenting every one of these as a false report. It's a Class B misdemeanor, you know." Her final desperate move in this paper war was to go to the media. She contacted a local TV news station, the kind that loves a good David versus Goliath story. Only she painted herself as David. They ran a 90-second segment on the evening news. It showed Cynthia, face etched with fake concern, standing in front of my locked gate. "We just want to be good neighbors," she said to the camera, her voice trembling slightly. "But this hostile rancher is holding our community hostage, blocking an access road that has been used for years. My clients, hardworking families who just want to live the American dream, are suffering." They cut to a shot of my private property sign, then back to her looking sad. They never bothered to call me for a comment. I watched it on my TV, a bitter taste in my mouth. Sarah put a hand on my shoulder. "That's it," she said, her voice firm. "This has gone too far. What are you going to do?" I looked at her. I showed her the stack of certified deeds from the courthouse. I showed her the fraudulent sales brochure from Eddie. I showed her the vet bill for Daisy, which was over $2,000. I showed her the lawsuit. "I'm going to spend the cattle fund," I said quietly. It was our savings, the money we set aside from selling a few head each year. It was for emergencies, for a new tractor, for our future. It was a significant amount of money. "I'm going to end this permanently." Sarah, my quiet, steady Sarah, who had been worried about the escalating cost and stress, looked at the cold anger in my eyes. She saw the evidence laid out on our kitchen table. She nodded slowly. "You're planning something," she said. It wasn't a question. Good. That was all the support I needed. My plan had been forming for weeks, a hard, crystalline structure in the back of my mind. It was time to build. It was time to show Cynthia Halloway what happens when you try to build a luxury development on a foundation of lies. This was no longer just about defending my property. It was about executing a counterattack so decisive, so final, that she would never bother me or anyone else ever again. And that's the thing about these HOA tyrants and corporate scammers. They rely on you playing by their rules they write and rewrite to suit themselves. They expect you to get bogged down in expensive legal battles and public opinion wars. They never expect you to pull out an old-fashioned, simple, and brutally effective solution. They never expect you to build a wall. If you've ever dealt with someone who thinks their entitlement gives them a claim to your property, go ahead and smash that like button, because you're going to love what happened next. The first call I made was to a man named Mike, but everyone called him Big Mike. He ran a construction company that specialized in concrete and steel work, everything from foundations to commercial buildings. Big Mike was a 6'4", 300-pound slab of a man who chewed tobacco, wore sweat-stained work shirts, and had a deep and abiding hatred for pretentious, entitled people. We'd known each other since high school. He was the kind of guy who'd give you the shirt off his back, but would happily bury you in concrete if you crossed him. He was perfect. I met him at the diner in town. I laid it all out on the table over coffee and chicken fried steak, the trespassing, the lawsuit, the fraud, the injured heifer. I showed him the deed and the brochure. His face, normally jovial, hardened as he listened. He slowly wiped his mouth with a napkin. "So this BMW Barbie is selling your driveway," he rumbled, a low growl in his chest. "That's the long and short of it, Mike," I said. "And you want to send a message." "I want to build a monument," I corrected him. "I want something that says, this conversation is over, in a way she can't ignore." I slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a rough sketch I'd drawn, a long, straight line where my gate was, with dimensions written on it. "I want a wall, Mike, 12 feet high, 100 feet long, 50 feet on either side of the road, steel-reinforced concrete, a foot thick, and in the middle, I want a new gate, a sliding steel gate, solid plate, set into a frame that's anchored right into the concrete and rebar of the wall itself." Big Mike looked at my sketch, then looked at me. A slow grin spread across his face, revealing a wad of tobacco tucked in his cheek. He spit into his empty coffee cup. "An agricultural security barrier," he said, nodding in appreciation. "Seen him on the big ranches down south, protecting against poachers and whatnot. You're talking serious money, Bo." "I know," I said. "I've got $52,000 in cash from the cattle fund. Mike whistled softly. That'll just about cover it. Materials are sky high right now. He leaned forward, his massive forearms on the table. You're really going to spend 50 grand just to stick it to this woman? I'm spending 50 grand to protect my property and my livelihood, I said. Sticking it to her is just the bonus. A very, very satisfying bonus. He slapped the table, making the silverware jump. I love it. It's the most Texan thing I've ever heard. When do we start? There's a catch, I said. It has to be timed perfectly. I told him about the grand opening weekend she had planned. Eddie the mailman had given me the flyer. It was set for the first weekend in June, just 2 weeks away. She was planning a big catered affair, inviting prospective buyers, investors, and the local press to celebrate her sold-out first phase. I want the wall to be complete by Friday evening of that weekend, I said. I want her open house to have a front row seat to its own failure. Mike's grin widened. Consider it done. We'll pour on Thursday, stand the forms Friday. She won't know what hit her. He stuck out a hand as big as a ham. Even a tank ain't getting through this, Bo. I promise you that. My next stop was back at the county offices. Not the clerk this time, but the planning and zoning department. Armed with my deeds and surveys, I filed the application. Big Mike had been right. The official designation was an agricultural security barrier. I filled out the paperwork, citing the need to protect high-value livestock assets from repeated trespassing and vehicular threat, and attached copies of the sheriff's false report incident numbers as supporting evidence. Because my property was zoned for agriculture and the structure was for security, not habitation, it bypassed a lot of the usual red tape. The permit was approved in 3 days. It was all legal, all above board, all untouchable. The 2 weeks leading up to the build were the calm before the storm. I saw Cynthia's BMW going in and out, her junior realtors following like pilot fish on a shark. They'd gotten cocky. They'd sued me, smeared me on the news, and I hadn't done anything back. They thought they'd won. I saw them pointing at my ranch, laughing with clients. I just stayed on my side of the fence, mending things, feeding my herd, watching and waiting. Every time I saw her smug face, I just pictured the look on it when the concrete trucks arrived. The day finally came, Thursday, 5 a.m. The sky was still a dark, bruised purple. The first sound wasn't birdsong, but the low rumble and hiss of air brakes. A convoy of heavy equipment rolled down the county road and stopped at the entrance to my property. Big Mike was in the lead in his F-350, followed by a flatbed carrying a bobcat, another with steel rebar cages and massive wooden forms, and behind them, the first of 6 concrete trucks. Mike's crew worked with a brutal efficiency. They were a team of hardened, sun-baked men who didn't waste a motion. Within an hour, they had used the bobcat to excavate a 2-foot wide, 4-foot deep trench across the 100-foot span. They laid down the massive, prefabricated rebar cages, a skeleton of steel that would give the wall its unbreakable spine. It was all happening right behind my old flimsy gate, which now looked pathetic by comparison. Around 8 a.m., the show started. Cynthia's white BMW came down the road. She stopped abruptly when she saw the scene. A construction crew, a massive trench, and a line of concrete trucks blocking her precious shortcut. She got out of her car, her face a mixture of confusion and outrage. She marched right up to Big Mike, who was directing the crane lowering a section of rebar. "What is the meaning of this? Who are you? You are blocking a community road," she shrieked, her voice cutting right through the morning air. Big Mike turned slowly, looked her up and down, and spit a stream of tobacco juice that landed inches from her white heels. "Ma'am," he said, his voice a low rumble, "this here is a private construction site, on private property. You're trespassing, and I'd move that fancy car before it gets covered in concrete dust. I am the developer of Sterling Meadows. I have a lawsuit pending against this man. You will cease this illegal construction immediately," she screamed, her face turning a blotchy red. That was my cue. I walked down from the porch, holding a coffee mug in one hand and a clipboard in the other. "Morning, Cynthia," I said, my voice calm and cheerful. "Nice day for a pour, isn't it?" She whirled on me. "You, what do you think you're doing? I will have you arrested. I will own this entire disgusting farm. I just smiled. I walked over to the new steel post where my private property sign was now bolted. I tapped the sign. Not in this county, darlin'. Then I held up the clipboard. This is a legally issued permit from the county for an agricultural security barrier on my property. And this, I said, pulling another paper from behind the permit, is a temporary restraining order, effective as of this morning, prohibiting you from setting foot on my land or interfering with my lawful activities. You're in violation of it right now. I suggest you get back in your car and leave. She stared at the papers, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. The legal documents, the sheer scale of the construction, it was finally dawning on her that this wasn't a game she was in control of. She sputtered, threatened to call her lawyer, the sheriff, the governor. My response was to nod to the concrete truck driver. The chute swung over the trench, and with a roar, the first load of wet, gray concrete began to pour, entombing the steel skeleton. It was a beautiful sight. She screamed in frustration and finally retreated, getting on her phone, pacing back and forth on the other side of the property line. As promised, the sheriff's deputies showed up, 2 of them. I recognized Deputy Miller. He got out, looked at the chaos, looked at Cynthia, who ran up to him, gesturing wildly, then walked over to me. "Morning, Beau," he said with a sigh. "She's claiming you're illegally blocking the road." I handed him the clipboard with the permit and the restraining order. He read them carefully. He walked over to the survey markers at the edge of the road, confirming we were well within my property line. He went back to his car and made a call. After a few minutes, he came back. "Permit's valid, Beau. Restraining order is in effect. She's been advised to stay on her side of the line or she'll be arrested. Try to keep it civil." He tipped his hat and went to talk to Cynthia, whose face fell as he explained the legal reality of the situation. The rest of the day and the next, she was a constant, shrieking presence. She watched as the concrete filled the trench. She watched as the massive wooden forms were erected on Friday morning. She watched as the second pour began, the wall itself rising from the ground foot by foot. She made endless phone calls. At one point, a harried-looking man in a suit, her lawyer, I presumed, showed up, argued with her for 20 minutes, threw his hands up in the air and left. She was alone watching her entire fraudulent enterprise being walled off in real time. By 5 p.m. on Friday, it was done. A solid, brutalist slab of gray concrete, 12 feet high, 100 feet long, stood gleaming in the late afternoon sun. It was more than a wall. It was a fortress. Set perfectly in the center was the new gate, a single, massive sheet of half-inch plate steel, painted black, resting on a silent, heavy-duty sliding mechanism. Big Mike's crew had outdone themselves. They packed up their tools, and as the last truck rolled away, Mike leaned out the window. "Enjoy the peace and quiet, Beau," he grinned. I shook his hand and thanked him. The grand opening for Sterling Meadows was scheduled for Saturday at 10 a.m. I saw the catering vans arrive, the little string quartet setting up on the lawn of the model home. I saw the balloons and the banners, and I saw the first of the prospective buyers arriving in their shiny cars, slowing down as they saw the monstrous, unexpected concrete wall that now dominated the ranch vista. Instead of a charming country lane, the entrance to my property was now a dead end, an impassable barrier. Cynthia was in full panic mode. She was running around, trying to direct cars, her voice strained, her fake smile plastered on her face. I watched from my porch, a fresh cup of coffee in hand. This was the moment I'd been waiting for, but the climax was even more spectacular than I could have imagined. Around noon, after hours of watching potential clients look at the wall, look at their fraudulent brochures, and leave in confusion, Cynthia Halloway snapped. I saw her arguing with a couple who were pointing furiously at the wall and then at the map in their hands. They got in their car and drove away. Cynthia stood there for a moment, trembling. Then she marched to her white BMW. She got in, slammed the door, and revved the engine. Sarah came out and stood beside me. "What is she doing?" she whispered. I said, pulling out my phone and hitting record. "She's about to provide us with the grand finale." She floored it. The BMW shot across the manicured lawn of her own model home, spitting up sod and dirt. She aimed it directly at the new steel gate. She must have been doing 50, 60 miles an hour. She must have thought, in her rage-addled mind, that she could smash through it, that her German engineering could defeat my Texas concrete and steel. The impact was biblical. It wasn't a crash. It was a detonation. The sound was a deafening crump of metal and a percussive boom that echoed across the prairie. The half-inch plate steel gate didn't budge. It didn't even vibrate. It had the full, immovable inertia of hundreds of tons of reinforced concrete behind it. The BMW, however, ceased to exist as a vehicle. The entire front end crumpled like a tin can, the engine block driven back into the firewall. The hood flew up and spun through the air. The airbags deployed with a violent poof. The car, or what was left of it, bounced back about 10 feet and sat there hissing steam and dripping fluid, a monument to bad decisions. For a second, there was dead silence. The string quartet had stopped playing. The handful of remaining buyers and realtors stood with their mouths open. Then, the car door was shoved open, and Cynthia Halloway stumbled out, a trickle of blood on her forehead from where her sunglasses had cut her. She looked at the mangled wreck of her status symbol, then at the unblemished, immovable gate. And she let out a scream. It wasn't a scream of anger anymore. It was a raw, animal wail of pure, absolute defeat. It was the sound of her entire world collapsing. And I had it all on video. The crash, of course, brought the authorities, and this time, they weren't just coming for a noise complaint. 2 sheriff's cruisers pulled up, lights flashing, followed by an ambulance. The news crew she had invited to cover her triumphant open house, who had been about to pack up and leave, suddenly had a much better story. Their camera was rolling, pointed right at the scene of the wreck. As the paramedics checked on a dazed and screeching Cynthia, I walked down my driveway, through my new, beautiful, and completely intact gate, which I slid open with the push of a button. I had a small box in my hand. I walked calmly over to the group of bewildered prospective buyers who were huddled together talking to one of the deputies. "Folks," I said, my voice carrying in the sudden quiet, "my name is Beau McCoy. This is my ranch." The news camera swung over to me. Perfect. "I'm real sorry you all were lied to." "This woman," I said, pointing to Cynthia as she was being helped to her feet, "has been selling you access to my private property, access she never had and never will have." I opened the box. Inside were a dozen neat packets. I handed one to each of the buyers, and one to the news reporter. "In here," I explained, "you'll find a certified copy of my land deed from 1947. You'll find the official county survey map showing my property lines. You'll find a copy of her sales brochure where she illegally advertises my private drive as a community amenity. And you'll find a copy of the restraining order she violated this morning. I think you'll find it makes for interesting reading." A murmur went through the small crowd as they opened the packets and saw the undeniable proof. The news reporter's eyes went wide. He was looking at documented, prosecutable fraud. Deputy Miller, the senior officer on the scene, had taken one of the packets. He read through it, his expression growing grim. He conferred with the other deputy, who had just finished taking my statement about the assault on my gate. Miller walked over to where Cynthia was refusing medical treatment. "Ma'am," he said, "I've seen the evidence provided by Mr. McCoy, and I've taken statements from these people you've entered into sales contracts with." He held up her glossy brochure. "This constitutes felony fraud by deception. The district attorney's office has already been consulted." Cynthia's face went pale under the blood and grime. "This is ridiculous. It's a civil matter. You can't—" "Cynthia Halloway," Deputy Miller said, his voice loud and clear for the camera and the crowd, "you are under arrest for multiple counts of felony fraud, criminal mischief for the repeated destruction of Mr. McCoy's property, and for the violation of a restraining order." The handcuffs clicked. It was a crisp, metallic sound that was more satisfying than I could have ever imagined. The cameras flashed. The remaining buyers started talking excitedly. their anger at Cynthia now mixed with relief that they'd found out the truth before closing. And I just stood there leaning against the solid steel frame of my new gate, a small, genuine smile on my face. My $52,000 wall had just paid its first dividend. The aftermath was a complete and total unraveling for Cynthia Halloway. The story was the lead on the 6 o'clock news. Local realtor arrested for fraud after ramming rancher's wall in bizarre standoff. My interview, calm and factual, contrasted sharply with the footage of her screaming and the crumpled wreck of her BMW. The public, especially the rural community, sided with me immediately. They saw it for what it was, a city slicker trying to swindle a man out of his land. The legal and financial fallout was swift. Armed with the proof of fraud, every single one of her prospective buyers voided their contracts. The clause about the Ranch View Express lane was a material misrepresentation, making the agreements worthless. Her investors, seeing the public implosion and the felony charges, pulled their funding. The bank called in the massive loan she'd taken out to finance the development. Within a month, her company, Sterling Meadows LLC, filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. She was personally ruined. The lawsuit against me was, of course, thrown out with prejudice. Her lawyer probably used my evidence packet to convince her she had no chance. She ended up pleading guilty to a lesser felony charge to avoid a long jail sentence, but she got 5 years of probation, a hefty fine, and had her real estate license permanently revoked. She lost everything. The half-finished development sat like a ghost town for almost a year before it was bought out of foreclosure by a different, more sensible company. The first thing they did was build a new, proper entrance on the other side of the development, one that connected directly to a main road. They even sent me a letter of apology for the actions of their predecessor. Life on the Riverside Ranch returned to normal, only better. The peace and quiet were absolute. The only traffic on my road was my own truck, and the occasional visit from the vet. Sarah planted climbing roses and honeysuckle along the base of the wall. After a year, you could barely see the concrete. It just looked like a massive, 100-foot-long green hedge, a very, very solid hedge. Daisy, my injured heifer, recovered fully. While the vet was right and she never bred again, she became the official ranch mascot, living out her days in peaceful retirement in the sunniest pasture. Sometimes, when I'm out on the porch at sunset, I look over at that wall, now covered in flowers, and I think about the cost. $52,000. It was a staggering amount of money for us. It was a new tractor. It was a decade of security. But it was also the price of peace. It was the price of justice. It was the cost of proving that in this corner of Texas, a person's home is their fortress. And some lines you just don't cross. They say good fences make good neighbors. But sometimes you need a 12-foot concrete wall to make a felon. It stands today as a monument, not to hate, but to resolve. A quiet, concrete reminder that you should never, ever mistake a rancher's patience for weakness. If you enjoyed this pro-revenge and believe that a person's property rights are sacred, do me a favor and hit that like button and subscribe for more tales from the ranch. Let me know in the comments below. What's the most outrageous thing an HOA or a bad neighbor has ever tried to pull on you? I've got a feeling there are a lot of stories out there that just need a little concrete to find a happy ending.